and welcome to my audio short story channel. It's good to have you here. Today's story is Peach Pits and Angels. David wonders why he decided to let a strange girl enter his house to bother his sick mom with notions about angels and healing. And why are all those peach pits showing up in the house? Enjoy the story. I'll see you at the end, and tune in next week when I share insights from today's story. Peach Pits and Angels, a short story, copyright 2023, Janet Keller Richards, all rights reserved. I could hear a person walking behind me on the sidewalk. It was probably someone from school, but I wasn't about to turn around and see who it was because I didn't want to talk to anyone. My daily walk home from Dalton High School was my time to think. My time to be a normal guy without pressure. My time to be alone before walking into the serious. Ever since last summer, I'd named my home The Serious because that was when my mom stopped baking cookies and singing in her rose garden and reading jokes out loud from the internet. That was when the whole house had turned quiet and fragile and gotten way too somber. The footsteps behind me got louder and closer, so I picked up my pace to stay ahead of them. Just then, something hard hit me squarely on the back of my head. An involuntary "ow" escaped from my lips. I stopped and rubbed the sting from my skull and shot an angry glance at whoever was following me. I was surprised to see a girl about my age and height. She had bright blue eyes, a mess of freckles on her cheeks, and long, wavy red hair. A wide smile full of sparkly, multicolored braces was plastered across her face. As rudely as I could, I said, "You threw a stone at me!" Her whole face managed to continue smiling while she calmly corrected me. It wasn't a stone, it was a peach pit. Well, technically, peach pits can be called stones, but it wasn't a rock, if you know what I mean. Looking down at the sidewalk, I noticed a dried peach pit near my right foot. I couldn't believe this oddball kid had tossed the remains of her lunch fruit at me, or worse, a piece of dried-out garbage. I picked up the pit and tossed it out onto the street. It rolled and came to a stop against the curb on the other side. Intentionally willing her to go away with my thoughts, I turned and started toward home again. But I could hear her following me, and the next thing I knew, she had pulled up beside me. That multicolored rainbow shining out from her orthodontics was too much for my stormy mood. I increased my stride and pretended to be alone. She easily kept pace and insisted on talking. "An angel threw it," she said. "It's his signature, so that people know he's been around. He was just playing. His name is Rafi." I stopped and glared at this nuisance of a girl and said with as much irritation as I could muster, "Do you mind? I'd like to be alone." I started walking again and hoped she'd gotten the message. She was either hard of hearing or stubborn, or both, because she stayed right beside me and continued to chatter. "But you asked for help," she said. I had no idea what she meant, but I argued anyway. "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did. Besides, Rafi thinks I should walk with you." I hadn't asked for help, not from her or from anyone else. I raised my voice. "You have an angel named Rafi who throws peach pits at people's heads. Aren't you special?" Sarcasm dripped from every word I spoke. "Don't you think it's peachy?" she asked. I rolled my eyes at her moronic joke. "And by the way," she said, "everybody has an angel. You have an angel too." I suddenly realized I had never seen this stranger before, and I was nearing the serious. If I turned onto my property and went into my house, she would know where I lived. I stopped on the sidewalk in front of my neighbor's home. The girl stopped beside me. She pointed directly at my house and said, "Do you know the people who live there?" "Okay, that does it," I demanded. "Are you stalking me?" I'd heard of people who track others. They sit outside of someone's home for hours at a time. They stare into their bedroom windows. They watch when they leave and when they return home, and they note any peculiar habits. She stared at me with her crystal clear blue eyes. "I only ask because Rafi just walked in through the front door of that home. Someone in that family probably needs his care." "What do you mean Rafi walked into the house? And how do you know about my mother?" The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, and there was no taking them back. I jerked my head away from her, sucking in air and groaning audibly. This screwball may not have known about my mom's blood disease, but now she knew it was my house. She raised her eyebrows and nodded at me. "Oh, so that's where you live. That explains everything." She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward my house. "Come on, I'd like to visit with your mother." I yanked my arm free and backed away from her. Without waiting for me, that obstinate girl cut across the grass of our property and headed toward my front door. As she walked, she motioned for me to join her and said, "Rafi's in there. Don't you think we should find out what he's up to?" I chased after her. "You can't just barge into my house. My mom's probably asleep. And I don't even know your name." She stopped quickly, so quickly I had to haul myself up short to avoid a collision. Holding out her hand to shake mine, she said, "I'm Rachel, like the wife of Jacob." Without a clue as to who Jacob was, I ignored her outstretched hand. She was unbelievable. Why was I putting up with her? Rachel didn't seem one bit bothered by my snub. She turned, walked to my front stoop, and stood with one arm folded over the other as if she was waiting for me to open the door. I caught up with her. "Give me one reason why I should invite a total stranger into my house." "You asked for help, and we're not strangers anymore. I introduced myself to you." Why in blazes was she insisting I had asked her for help? I couldn't decide what to do. She didn't seem to be the type of person to stalk me, but it made no sense to bring a stranger into the middle of the serious. I don't know how long I stood with my head down, staring at the ground and wondering about the peculiar girl. Soon, a sigh built up somewhere in the bottom of my lungs and gathered steam until it released itself fast and strong out of my mouth. I couldn't believe I was going to do it. Almost surreally, I opened the door and let her go in ahead of me. "Thank you," she said, as she walked right into my foyer. Inside to the left was our formal dining room. But when the whole house had turned into the serious, my mom's hospital bed had been moved into that space. So now it was a bedroom, a visiting room for friends, and a place for the whole family to be able to hang out. "Mom, you're awake!" Shutting the front door, I tossed my backpack on the floor and ran over to my mom's bed. Lately, Mom had been sleeping almost non-stop, but at the moment, she was propped up on a pillow, looking more alert than I had seen her in weeks. "Hi, David," she said weakly as she smiled a thin smile. I felt the red-headed girl move next to me, and before I could form the words to explain to my mom why there was a stranger in the room, she was introducing herself. "Hi, David's mom. My name is Rachel, like the wife of Jacob. I'm a friend of David's." I tossed that girl a look that let her know she wasn't my friend. "Hi, Rachel," my mother said. "I'm Mrs. Jordan." "Did you meet the angel yet?" Rachel asked my mom. "His name is Rafi." I cringed. My mom was having a good day, and this girl was wasting precious quality time with her nonsensical conversation. "An angel," my mother said. I couldn't tell if her eyebrows were raised because she thought Rachel was nuts, or because the angel idea had caught her by surprise. The girl was nodding confidently. "But not everyone can see Rafi. Right now he's standing behind you, and he's got his hands on your head." I watched my mother's mouth as she laughed. The sound was musical. I couldn't remember the last time I had heard that beautiful, wonderful sound. Mom answered her kindly. "Thank you, Rachel. What a creative thing to say. Maybe that's why I'm feeling a little better." Rachel turned and winked at me, and then moved to the far side of the bed to gently take hold of Mom's hand. "You're going to be just fine, Mrs. Jordan. Rafi and I can guarantee it." Mom cocked her head and looked at Rachel with curiosity. "Really?" she asked. And again, I couldn't tell if she was asking for real or if she was being sarcastic. "Yep," Rachel answered. "God sent Rafi and me to help you." Something caught in my mother's throat and she wheezed. Then the hacking cough started, the kind where she always held her ribs to make the pain more bearable. I grabbed the glass of water from her nightstand and offered it to her. She took it and drank a few swallows, and at last the coughing stopped. Rachel spoke calmly. "You'll see. Things will turn out just peachy." I gave her a cold, hard stare. Was she blind or just incredibly insensitive? Hadn't she seen my mom wheezing and holding her side in excruciating pain? At the start of the Sirius, my dad had sat me down and explained everything about my mom's blood disease and the breakdown of her immune system. Dad had said the doctors could only delay her dying. I turned to the girl and said, "Rachel, stop it. I think you should leave now." I didn't want my mother to get her hopes up, only to feel bad afterward. My mom set her glass down. "Honey, don't worry. It's all right. Rachel meant well." She stroked my hair and smiled at me. I was amazed that my mother was able to speak so many sentences in a row. This really was one of her outstanding days. I smiled back at her. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Rachel bend down toward the floor. "How was school, David?" Mom's kind eyes were watching me like she used to do before our house had turned into the Sirius. Because of her sickness, we hadn't talked about school for weeks, so her question about my daily life felt strange. I couldn't think how to answer because I'd been keeping my thoughts to myself for so long. They'd gotten all tangled up in my brain in a silent mess that was impossible to sort out. So I just shrugged and said, "It was okay." "That's it?" she asked. "Just okay?" I pulled my brows together in thought and searched for something important to say while Mom still had energy and could focus. It was at that moment of contemplation that I noticed Rachel had never stood up from bending down to the ground. "Hey, where's that kid?" I walked to the other side of the bed and looked around. I got on my knees and looked under the bed and all around at ground level, but she wasn't there. Standing up, I looked at my mother blankly and decided Rachel was going to get a piece of my mind because this certainly wasn't the time or place to be playing hide and seek. Mom was staring at something in her hand and said with uncertainty, "What in the world? I wonder where this came from." She held her open palm toward me so I could see the object in it. "I haven't eaten a peach since the summertime." I gawked at the dried peach pit and protested, But I threw that away. Threw what away? Mom asked. On the way home from school, that girl Rachel hit me on the head with a peach pit. I picked it up and threw it to the other side of the street. Still studying it, Mom said, "Well, I wonder how it got here." "Where did you find it?" I asked. With a perplexed look on her face, Mom answered, "I'm not sure. I looked down, and there it was in my hand, but I have no idea how it got there." Flotsam from my wacky conversation with Rachel floated to the surface of my thoughts, and it was at that moment I remembered. When the Sirius had come to hover over my home like a hostile alien spaceship, I had done an internet search on the existence of God. But sorting through the Buddha God, the Hindu God, the Muslim God, the Christian God, and all the other God options had been too confusing. In frustration, I'd finally talked out loud to my computer screen. "Whoever you are, will the real God come and fix my mom? I need her. Dad and I need her. Please. She can't." I stopped there because I didn't want to say the D word. A real God would know what I meant. "Please," I begged, "help us." Plastic silence had reflected back at me from my computer. I finally gave up and let the gods roam inside the search engine to work out their own existences. As my mind returned to the present, I realized that girl had been right. I had asked for help. I walked into the foyer, then searched beyond it to our living room, our family dining area, our kitchen, and even to the bathroom next to the kitchen. There was no sign of Rachel. As I walked back into the formal dining room area, I saw my mom standing up beside her bed. I yelled and ran to her. "Mom, you shouldn't be out of bed. You're too—" She interrupted me. Why shouldn't I get out of bed? I held on to her to keep her from falling. Her legs wobbled a little bit, but she steadied herself with a hand on the bed and said, "I wonder what happened to your friend." "Mom, she wasn't my friend. I never saw her before she hit me today with that peach pit." Grabbing her housecoat from the nearby recliner, my mother slid the dried peach pit into one pocket. She pulled on one sleeve and then another, tied a knot in the belt at the front, and said reflectively, "Didn't she have the bluest eyes you've ever seen?" As she started walking toward the kitchen, she smiled and said happily, "Oh, it feels wonderful to be standing and walking." I walked beside her, still holding on, and began to protest. But who was I to stop my mother when she was obviously feeling stronger than she had felt in weeks? Instead, I said, I think I'll take my backpack into my bedroom. I'll be back." "Okay, sweetie, I'm not going anywhere." Mom grinned at her own little joke. Except for doctor's visits, we both knew she hadn't been out of the house for a long time. I walked into my room and tossed my backpack on the bed. Sitting down at my desk, I startled and immediately jumped out of my chair because there was a peach pit on my desk pad. I picked it up and raced out to the formal dining room. "Mom, do you still have that peach pit?" "It's in my pocket." "Can I see it?" She pulled it out and showed it to me. I stood frozen and gaping while my brain spun around what I was seeing. "David, what's wrong?" I held out the pit in my hand. It was in my room. "Isn't that strange?" Mom shook her head and then added thoughtfully, "Do you remember? Rachel used that word. She said things would turn out just peachy, that God sent her and the angel, what was its name? Oh yes, Rafi. She said God sent them to help." As one who had given up long ago, experiencing hope was something like jump-starting a rusty old motor. My heart sputtered and caught and finally pounded to life. "Mom, how are you feeling? Are you okay?" She gave me a peculiar glance. "You know, I haven't felt this strong for a long time." She walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator door. I must say I rather like being vertical. I wasn't sure how to ask the question without creating suspicion, but I had to know the answer. "When did you start feeling better?" Rummaging through the chaos of Chinese takeout containers, a pizza box, and various TV dinners strewn throughout the refrigerator, Mom said, "You and Dad haven't been eating very well, have you?" "Mom, when did you start to feel better?" "I don't know, honey," she said while looking in the fridge. "I suppose a few minutes before you came in the door." Grabbing a bag of baby carrots, my mother closed the refrigerator door and sat down on a stool at the counter. "Isn't it grand?" I watched in absolute amazement as my mother ate a carrot. A carrot! After she'd lost her appetite, my dad and I practically had to force her to sip pureed soups and fruit juices. And now she sat there contentedly chewing a carrot. "I'll be right back." Without waiting for her response, I hurried back to my bedroom a second time and closed the door. Leaning back, I looked up at the ceiling, just because it seemed like the best place to look while talking to an actual God. "I have no idea what just happened," I said to him. "But if that girl was right, I mean if my mom is better because if those peach pits were... So if you did answer me and you are helping my mom..." There were no words to describe the honest emotions swirling around my head and all through my chest and over my whole body. I gave up trying to talk. I slid down the door into a sitting position. It was all too fantastic to believe. But how did that girl, Rachel, get out of our house? 2 people were in the room with her. 2 people saw her, and she was suddenly just not there. And how in the world was my mom standing up and walking and eating? And where did those peach pits come from? Why on earth would an angel use peach pits as their calling card? The last question had nothing to do with figuring out the sequence of extraordinary events, but it was bothering me. Who knew? I figured maybe angels have a sense of humor. Hope massaged my emotions, and I said softly to that God, "So if you're fixing my mom, thank you." I looked down at the peach pit still in my hand and decided I should check on my mom. I stood and opened the door and paused to direct one more desire toward the ceiling to the real God. "And please show me which one of the gods you are, because if this is actually happening, you're mind-blowingly awesome." As I was walking down the hallway toward the formal dining room, a piece of paper fell off one of my parents' floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. I stopped and picked it up to put it back. When I laid it down on the bookshelf, right there at eye level was another peach pit. That was 3 peach pits, 4 if I counted the one out on the street. This pit was leaning against the spine of an old family book that had belonged to my grandma. Mom had told me the book was a family treasure, but I never bothered to pick it up and look at it. I gently pulled it off the shelf. Its cover was faded and torn. The pages of the book were discolored, as if they'd been fingered many times. I flipped it open to a random page and gawked. All I could say was, "Wow, Grandma!" There were handwritten notes in every margin and one place where she'd underlined a sentence. It seemed important, so I read it out loud. It said, "As he stepped from the boat, Jesus saw the huge crowds. He had compassion on them and healed their sick." I'd heard of this Jesus. Kids used his name all the time on the basketball court, but I'd never heard of him healing people. Maybe he had something to do with the real God. laying the family treasure down on the bookshelf so I could come back and read it later. I picked up the peach pit to show my mom and walked toward the kitchen. Mom was rummaging through the cupboards. I could only stand there and shake my head in amazement at her transformation. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I laughed out loud. I couldn't wait to see Dad's face when he walked in the door after work. The atmosphere in the house had already changed. I could feel it. Everything was lighter. And then I realized, thanks to the real God and two of his definitely quirky angels who used peach pits in a cosmic scavenger hunt, thanks to him, I would need to find a new name for our home. I could no longer call it the Sirius. Thank you so much for listening. I trust you enjoyed this story. Of course, I'm always interested in what you have to say about it, so please leave a comment below. And join me next week when I share about today's story, where the idea came from, how it applies to life, and how it builds hope, etc. Also, in the description below, you will find a link to the written form of today's story, as well as information about my allegorical novel and other books I've written. And finally, as you can imagine, it does take time to write, edit, and record these stories. If you enjoy them, please consider supporting their creation with a one-time thanks. I will see you next week, and until then, I hope you have a great week.